If God is so good, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Asked that question recently, have you? We all do when there's a calamity, a catastrophe, a tsunami, right now a pandemic. This is basically the argument against Christianity. If God allows evil and suffering, then perhaps he can't stop it. And if he can't stop it, then he might be good, but he's not all powerful, right? Or if he allows evil and suffering to continue because he could stop it, but he doesn't or won't, then he might be all powerful, but he can't be all good. Either way, the good or powerful God of the Bible couldn't possibly exist. When we experience horrendous things, suffering and catastrophe, one of the ways we respond to it is to back away from God. Even maybe abandon our belief in God. It's perfectly natural, and a lot of people do it. But a lot of suffering, though, is self-inflicted, isn't it? Smoking, drinking, overeating, all of these things can lead to poor health and possibly death. And it's not only something that affects us personally, it affects everybody around us. If we become greedy and we steal or kill for our own personal gain, then we're bringing suffering again into our lives and into those around us. Where was God during the tsunamis? Where is God now during this pandemic? I have to say, in my opinion, this question is the first step toward God. And anyone who asks the question, where was God? Why does this happen? Is beginning to actually think and is taking their first step to being a theologist. When we experience horrendous suffering and catastrophe, one of the ways we respond is to back away from God or even abandon our beliefs in God. It's perfectly natural, and a lot of people do it. A lot of suffering, though, is self-inflicted. Smoking, drinking, overeating, they all lead to poor health and sometimes death. Now, that doesn't only affect us personally, it also affects all your loved ones, your friends, your family. If we become greedy and steal or even kill for our personal gain, we bring suffering into our lives and to those around us. There is nothing more certain than you are most likely to suffer during your lifetime, or at least the people around you are going to suffer. They'll either suffer disease or death, disaster, or deep disappointment. And when you suffer, it is oh so natural to ask the question, why? In fact, it's probably the first thing that comes out of your mouth when tragedy hits. Why me? Why then? Why now? Why? And basically, people respond in two ways. You have the religious types of people who say, why is God punishing me? What have I done wrong? And a lot of religious people believe that if you're ill, it's because you've done something wrong and you don't have enough faith. Or if you're having financial problems, you still haven't enough faith. We call it moralism. The other response is cynicism. Whereas religious people see suffering as punishment, secular people, they tend to see suffering as just the randomness of life. Stuff happens. And if they consider God, they see it as this is proof that there isn't a God. Or if there is, he's pretty indifferent. Or maybe even incompetent. So what do you think? Do you think that God should just turn up, halt all the proceedings, stop everything that's happening because, hey, look, what we've done, what our choices have taken us down the wrong road, and look what's happening? There has to be a price for every mistake. There's cause and there's effect. If the world keeps going down the wrong road, if you as a person keep making the wrong choices, you're going to suffer. That's the law of God, and it's the law of the universe, its cause and its effect. Should you then stand back and blame God because you chose to put your hand in the fire after he has so many times told you not to? God has given us enough free will for us to choose whether to follow him or whether to go down our own road. You can't have it both ways. You either want to do things your own way or you want him to intervene. Now come on, what's it to be? Do you want to follow God, or do you want to say, I don't even believe that you exist, get stuffed, give me all that rubbish, isn't that what we say? I don't want to hear it. And then when it all goes wrong, where's God when this all goes wrong? You can't have it both ways. Now you might get to say, well, who tells me what is good and what is bad and what's right and what is wrong? Should I be worrying about what some book from the past says that you say God has written? That is God's word. Okay, who is going to tell you what is right and what is wrong? Your own heart, your own belief, society's belief. And each society has a different standard of what's acceptable and what isn't. Well, in Britain, we could say that if you murder somebody, you're going to go to prison. There was a time when if you murdered somebody, you would also be killed. We don't have death penalty now, but we do have life imprisonment. If someone had killed your child or your family member, would you really and truly be happy with them saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me? Even if they meant it, even if they were totally sincere, would that be enough for you? Or would you want to see a justice, some justice done? A trial, a jury, imprisonment, some sort of punishment? I think that's what everybody really wants. Most people want justice for wrongs that are done them. But isn't it God's job to forgive? Well, we all want justice in our lives, don't we? Who's to say what is right and what is wrong without a judge? Who's to say that one action is better than another? Without God as a judge, the standard we measure our behaviour by is nothing more than what's in our own heart or in our own mind, and then there's nothing higher than what you believe to judge anybody's behaviour. So in other words, if we think it's okay to steal, then it's okay to steal. And if you think it's okay to enslave people, then it's okay to enslave people. So there's nothing higher than your own heart to judge your own behaviour. Well, justice has two sides to it. One is punishment, cause and effect. So if God loves but doesn't punish, then he isn't being faithful to us, and he cannot be honoured for his word. For when God says, thou shalt not kill, and if you do, you too will suffer death, hellfire even. If he doesn't punish the murderer, if no one pays for it, then he's not a God worthy of honour or worship. If he doesn't keep his word, then he's a liar, and he's not worthy of honour and worship. Straightforward enough, isn't it? In our society we have rules. If you break them, there are consequences. If a person's found guilty of murder, society would never say, well, he did say he was sorry. She said she was sorry. That's okay then, isn't it? No, we might feel the person might even really and truly have repented, but we still feel that there must be justice. And there is always a price to be paid. Why should God be any different? The wages of sin is death. I think nearly everybody has heard that quote. That's from 1 John 3 verse 4. The wages of sin is death. God's universe is held together through cause and effect. Now we can live our lives ignoring certain facts, but we will pay for it in the end. We can smoke cigarettes. The penalty's poor health, poor breathing, and maybe an early death, maybe from cancer. We have a choice, but there's still a price to be paid. Then there is the breaking of earthly laws. If someone steals a car, some money, but we will have to pay the price of imprisonment. We can kill somebody. Maybe it's an accident, but there's a price to be paid. Which, of course, as I said, used to be death. And still is in some countries. Would we really be happy to say to a terrorist bomber, "Oh, we know you're sorry. Don't worry," and not expect punishment to be given? Well, God is the same. There's always a price to be paid. Someone has to pay. Now, most people, when they approach Jesus, and I say Jesus meaning God also, they come at a time of suffering. Just like the thief on the cross, we usually ask a question. Are you the Christ? I have a test for you. If you are really the Christ, if you are truly, really the Christ, then get me out of here. Stop my execution. Save me from this. Millions of people get into disaster, troubles they feel they can't handle, and they decide to call on God. Let's see if he's really there. God, if you're truly there, if you truly exist, if you're really listening, if you're real, get me out of this situation. And if you don't, well, stuff it. Forget you. But this is a prayer of I'll serve you if. I'll serve you if you give me that. So what you're really saying when you speak like this is, I have things in my life that are far more important to me than you. And I'm not giving them up for you or for anyone. I don't want to change my life. I just want you to get me out of this situation. It's the same attitude as the rich man in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. When he asked for Lazarus to be sent from heaven down to hell to give him some water to quench the fire because he's suffering. Notice the rich man doesn't want to give up his life. He doesn't want to give up and get out of hell and go to heaven to be with Lazarus. He wants Lazarus to give up his peace in heaven and come down and look after him in hell. He wants God on his terms. There are some people who don't care about justice at all. They say, yes, I know there is all kinds of suffering in the world, but I can't do anything about it, can I? And I can't be bothered about it. That's life. I'm going to look out for myself, and they don't really care about justice, but then there are a great many that do. Some try to bring justice. They try to bring it through laws or bringing attention to, say, racism or poverty, and they demand that things get done about it. So, here we are. There are people who don't care about justice and those that do. And then there are Christians. Christians, look at the cross to see that justice is so absolutely important that God could not set it aside. That his Son had to die on the cross to satisfy the demands of justice. But at the same time, we know that you and I were the perpetrators of injustice. And the real ultimate injustice is that we have not treated God as we should. It's a form of cosmic treason. God gives us everything, and we live as though we belong to ourselves. And you know what? God has already forgiven us for that. So we know that justice is important, and we must be gracious and be kind. We know that Jesus came not to bring the vengeance of God, he came to bear it. And that if you let that get into your center of your heart, it will turn you into agents of justice in the world. One thing that has happened because of this pandemic is that I keep reading these wonderful poems and thoughts that people have come up with on how this dreadful pandemic has caused people to look at others in a different way, in a kind way, in a Christian way. They go out and they help others. They treasure their loved ones. Long may it last. It's a Christian attitude of loving your neighbour as yourself. That's what stops a tsunami of terror and catastrophe and all things that go wrong in your life. Love your neighbour as yourself. It isn't easy to do. If it was, we'd all be living in peace times now. Love your neighbour as yourself. That's it. Jesus said the whole of God's law rests on two things. You love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and you love your neighbour as yourself. If you were to do those two things, if the world was to do just those two things, we would be at peace. You wouldn't have catastrophe in your life, and we would be filled with joy, and it would be heaven on earth.